51?
That's really sudden.
It's not like kids, we have to.
So hi, my name's Isabelle Stevenson. We had this discussion about who was going to introduce, so I said, no, I'll just do it, and then realized I really don't like doing this at all. So I don't generally like try and just be, right, just start talking, but I think board's a little different, and so I'm trying to be more formal. It's a bit of an effort. So just let me establish my bona fides just a little bit for you. So this is me, Isabelle Stevenson. This is an article I wrote about strategy a couple of years ago that was published in the Cap'n. And then the book that a colleague at UConn and I wrote on strategy, it's going to be published in December. Currently for pre-sale on the Routledge website. There's a back to school sale, so I believe it's even like 15% off at the moment. Now's a really good time to go get it. I work for the Connecticut Center for School Change. It is a nonprofit based in Hartford. It's been in existence for about 20 years. I've been working there for the last 7. We work with school districts on a variety of projects. Usually our contracts are with superintendents to help them with some initiative that they're working on, generally around equity or some aspect of strategic planning. I also do a lot of work, excuse me, with coaches. Coaches through the Connecticut Association of Public School Superintendents are provided to new superintendents in the state. We also have a lot of districts that have instructional coaches, and there's also coaching for principals, and so I try and get my hand in as much of that as I possibly can. Oh, and I put in a photograph of me so that you'd see what I look like when I'm smiling. This is a strategy workshop that we did a year past in June, and we would have done again, except there's a global pandemic, and so we've had to kind of adjust a little bit. So Superintendent asked me to come so that she could be more of a sort of observer of this process and listen to you while there was someone else taking care of the facilitation. So I'm very happy to do that. We've had a lot of conversation about what this evening could and should look like, and her desire to get your input and to know how you're thinking, so that this will, in combination, obviously she's done a lot of work already on listening to the community, so that she can pull these things together and help construct a plan for moving forward. I just want to say, as a taxpayer and as a parent myself, I always like to be able to thank members of the board for the work that you do, because I know how many hours it takes, and I know how committed you are. And a lot of that work is kind of unsung, unheralded. So just know that there are people like me who know enough to be grateful. We're going to start off by asking you to do a little work around the vision of the graduate. So I gather that not many of you were really involved in this process when it was initiated, whenever that was. It was probably quite recently, and I forgot to check.
I think it was 2017. I can count on Karen, who's in the back, who remembers every single date of everything. And Karen is probably, Karen and Kathleen. Kathleen, were you here?
No, I came in, Margaret might have, I came in just as I think it had been implemented. Right, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
2 people in the room that were a part of that, possibly.
school districts have had vision and mission statements for forever, right? It's been a part of what has been the public facing, almost the connection, right? The interface between the school board or the senior leadership and the public. There's some kind of statement. In recent years, there's been a move towards making that vision more student specific And in the Northeast especially, that's really become more solidified because NEASC, which is your accreditation body, codified it, right? So the standards for accreditation now include specifically that the high school should have a vision of the graduate. And it became, I think, apparent really quickly that if the high school had to have it, then it didn't really make much sense just to start that at 9th grade, because a lot of the skills and dispositions that we want students to have are not going to be developed in the 4 years of high school, right? If we want people to be good citizens, then we should probably be getting them to say please when they're 2, right? This is not something that we should be starting when they leave 8th grade. So pretty much all, there are some school districts that really did not engage this or left it to their high schools, right? But nearly all districts in Connecticut really engage this as a district. And the Association of School Superintendents and the Association of Boards of Education really got behind that, and there's been grant money to support that work, and there's been a lot of effort put into it. So what we think of then, we used to consider the vision, and I think now that's really morphed into the vision of the graduate. I really don't think there's any reason to have 2 separate statements, if there ever was. There certainly isn't now, because that really is the role of the board, to make sure that your students graduate the school district with the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that are described in your vision of the graduate. So the mission then of the district is to fulfill that vision, right? So you exist as a board to set in motion a chain of events that will eventually lead to students graduating with the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that this community has determined to be important. Your mission may include how you want this done, but really that's your main job, right? That is the mission of the board. So we were just kind of curious, really, as to what you think it says. So please, would you take a couple of minutes and write down on the notepad or record in some other fashion, but please don't text anybody else.
I learned that.
I was paying attention. I know you're not supposed to do that. What do you think is contained in Ridgefield's vision of a graduate? May I pass them out now?
Yes, you may. Do you want me to do that for you?
No, I think I'm good. Put the face down. Don't,
No cheating.
don't. No kicking out.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so pub quiz. Just kidding. Okay, so I'm gonna put it up on the screen, but also you have copies. So let's just take a look, and you can compare what you thought with what it says. Actually, I'm just gonna, did you animate it up?
Ooh, fancy, hang on.
Somebody did that, wasn't me.
I didn't do it. I don't know how to fix that, but I'll try.
No, it
Should
should
they
all
all
come up.
marry together? Oh.
Yeah, it should, but it's,
There's also, rather than
that's
fix
why we
it,
have
you
copies.
Here, this anyway, yeah.
yeah, you could just go to the other version if you wanted to,
All right.
like, unskip that slide.
Yeah. Hang on, I can, that works for now, you're gonna go to the other one.
There we go. Sorry you don't get the.
Same
key.
thing, different version.
But it- Yeah,
Less
same
than-
words. So can I just ask, does that say what you were expecting it to say? Is there anything about it that is surprising or disappointing or remarkable to you?
I'll speak to it a little bit, is that, having been a part of the work in two school districts, I always just find it interesting that there's a lot of people coming together, right? They think about this, they process, they work together, and many of these just look the same across many districts, which I imagine it's because we're looking for the same dispositions, right, from our high school students, but they're very similar.
There's a lot on here. There's a lot of compromises that are made in the language too. I think that's part of it is, if you look at this sheet of paper, typically a vision that's actionable has a couple of core components that everyone can use in their day-to-day planning, where this has so many words that it becomes a bit of a novel and it's hard to apply on a day-to-day basis as you're making decisions, which should be what you're using this for, right? A decision tool. So I would just say that may be why, because I don't think there's anything that's not on here. It's all those people coming together and compromising on what's included. That makes it broader. Not that it's bad, it's just broad.
Yeah, I was, rather than knowledgeable, which I think can construe so many different meanings, just knowing things. What I included on my list was critical thinkers, but thinking it, a little more deeply just than gathering information, but, and there's a few others. I was surprised nothing about global citizens was there, but maybe that's in the mission.
It's in the mission.
What?
Or US American citizens too.
But this, it's really just it's a bullet list, it's not really, in my, like to Liz's point, a vision statement would be a couple of sentences. This is just a bullet list, and it looks like everybody had it when it all got in there.
So is there anything on here that you don't think is necessary for students to acquire?
In context of COVID, some of these are even more important than ever, but I think it's, a mission statement of vision, again, is usually not a punch list. It's not a task list. It's something that flows a little bit better and gives you that direction.
I think this kind of goes back to maybe one of the buckets, Dr. Silva, that you were talking about, being the strength of the district, value on the whole child. That's what I see here. That we want them to be innovative, resilient, communicative, knowledgeable, mindful, collaborative. And I don't know if it should be more specific, because if it's the vision of the graduate and we say we want it to start in elementary school in our earliest years, it could look very different to a kindergarten teacher than it could a sixth grade teacher or a high school teacher.
Yeah, so to that point, some districts have taken this and sort of broken it down into what I would call a learning progression. Like, this is what this looks like in kindergarten, and this is what it looks like in 10th grade or 12th grade, right? This is the obligation that teachers have with regard to vision of the graduate at these different developmental levels.
I think something that I would want on here, and I don't know if they include it, is, you know, what, and probably going a little more deeply, are the opportunities to practice each of these competencies so that the learning is attained, and then how is that assessed and communicated to families and children? Because I think it's an important piece to circle it out, but otherwise you just have a list.
Okay, so hold on to that thought, because I think that is actionable, right? I mean, that is something that the board could say should be done, right? That's definitely something that would be part of at least your continuous improvement, if not entirely your execution.
I know from having a student at the high school that they integrate these components into a lot of the messaging and into the lessons that I've seen already. So I think that this is on the minds of teachers from what I've seen, and it's even called out in a lot of ways.
I did hear in early budget meetings before I transitioned to Ridgefield that the administrative teams refer to this when they were presenting their school-based budgets and goals, is how the work, for example, the work of Yale's ruler, right, talked about some of the mindfulness and being mindful and empathetic and self-aware. I did feel, at least publicly, that resonated with our school-based leaders. How that looks practically or operationally, starting in kindergarten, if we were looking to the end before we begin, right? We look to the end and now we begin in kindergarten or preschool. Operationally, I'm not sure, but at least big vision, yes.
Anything else? So, oh yeah, let's do that. Oh, sorry.
I think that's just playing a trick on us.
I know, wasn't doing this earlier?
Not at all. All right, there we go.
Magic. Okay, so what we want to do then is tie this to the work of the board, right? So indeed, vision of the graduate is intentionally broad and comprehensive. But also you have students with you for a very long time. So you certainly have a great deal of opportunity to imbue them with all these terrific characteristics, right? What we would like you to do is to take a few minutes. So you have Postits in front of you. We'd like you to decide, or at least make a first bid on how this connects to the work of the board. So what should a priority of the board be in a universe where you're trying to fulfill this vision? What we're going to have you do is write as many as you like, right? But please, one per Post-it, because we're going to have you sort them when you're done. So I'm going to give you just about 5 minutes to really think this through. Where do you want to hang these?
We can do, just so that we can socially distance, we can spread. I can spread them out.
Should we split them?
Yeah.
No, they need to be together.
So what we're gonna ask you to do is sort your Post-its according to the board goals that have already been identified. So, we passed out to you what those currently are, so that we're trying to sort of minimize the amount of movement. So there is a chart, piece of chart paper for every one of the goals that is identified on this document. So if you would, when you're ready, put up your Post-its on the appropriate piece of chart paper, that would be great. And do we also have a parking lot?
We have an other, so
We
if
have
you,
an other.
yeah, so if what you're thinking would be a priority for you doesn't fit into the priorities that the Board of Education has identified as their goals, you would just come drop it into other over here. And they're labeled, not in order. That's 4, I think. Goal 4 is there, goal 2, you can read them, but they're not exactly in order. And then I think what you said, you should try it.
Yeah, cluster them. Gonna corral those Post-its. Give them mine to the road.
It's too much. I'll stick to my hand, don't
Sorry,
Sorry,
Matt,
no,
I'm trying to stay.
6 feet apart, you
That's
tell.
all right.
We're wearing a mask.
We're masked though, so we can't be 6.
You're still gonna get yelled at.
That's all right.
That's how social media works.
Oh, if I don't get yelled at 10 times a day, it's not a good day.
Mass police.
Means you're not taking any risks.
Oh, all right, I think. Some in here. Actually, you know what, this is probably over here too. Oh, yeah, I guess. This one.
Oh, wait, I put that on the wrong one. What number was this? Oh, I put that.
You're ready to go.
I'm not sure. Is pass fail or?
I think putting them on the
Only
right
to the
goal
codes.
is what's hard.
People don't know where the red and blue.
Not here.
next step, you have dots. There is no meaning to the color of the dots. A dot is a dot is a dot. Although the yellow ones on yellow Post-its are kind of hard to see. So we've tried to sort of group these. So a little bit. This Post-it is just truly random. These ones over here. But the rest you can see where, you know, sort of there are ideas. So feel free to group these Post-its so that, you know, the idea here is that if two different Post-its are saying the same thing, then they should really go together so that people aren't splitting their vote, so to speak. So there's nothing scientific about this, right? We are merely trying to take the temperature. So please walk around, read what the Post-its say, and if there is one that strikes you as particularly important, then give it a dot, or a group of Post-its that you think are important. Give them a
If
dot.
I may, I think it's probably too hard to do the group, it'll be too hard to tell which
Yep.
ones. So you may just have to put the dots on the Post-it, either front
Yeah.
or back, just kind of flip the Post-it, I think. Right? I think that.
So you really, yeah, but then okay, so let's not flip the
Okay,
Post-its.
so we won't flip the Post-it, but just try to put your dots so that you can still read the Post-it, but.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, don't go.
I won't want to Post-it.
Don't cover the right.
In other words, I wouldn't want someone to think that that Post-it was with another Post-it and therefore they didn't put it up.
Okay.
How
Does
many
that make any
Post-its are
difference
you
what color?
recommending per day?
I'm not making a recommendation. I just think if people feel like there's something like really significant that we should be paying attention to, then we'd like to know that.
Okay.
How many
Others
dots?
not?
How many dots can we spend?
You can send as
You
many
can,
dots as you want.
okay, you can
Yeah,
have
all
one,
dots, got it.
if you want more than one
I'm
sheet,
used to three,
I'm gonna
I know.
charge for that. So you get one sheet.
You can have one of my sheets.
But you know, you start putting dots on everything, then you're not really differentiating.
And nothing
so-
means anything.
Husband your dots.
It's like when you ask third graders to highlight the important information.
The whole.
So, as many dots as you want, or should we say, no more than, it's hard if you're not gonna be going around.
Yeah, no, I
No,
think you
no,
should,
no.
yeah,
Okay.
Be
so
judicious.
We'll try it.
but we're not gonna charge you. There's no dot count.
You're not gonna know who we are.
Make your groupings tight.
Yeah, really.
Find out later.
Guess that's why that was empty. Go ahead, big board.
Oh, then don't breathe on me.
No. Yeah. Oh, then I have to be
There's
quick.
such a little.
Oh, trying to do a thing.
It's in one of these, it's not on.
More plexiglass, she said, more plexiglass. See, that's stuff in your sleeve.
You did a great job. Thank you. Patient for that. Yellow.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. That's what I'm gonna do, my passive aggressive move.
Show us that.
Yeah.
Come on, seriously.
I know.
It's in the title. It's in the title.
No, she's, so she's okay. I think there's, like Liz was just saying, she felt like she was assistant superintendent, so she didn't want to engage her like the community board, I said, it's okay. Okay. Extra dot. All right. Perfect.
Let's go down.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go.
Come on here, we can do this.
You know, that way there's one part of it.
This one. 6 feet here. 6 feet. No, we got masks.
Yeah.
Must be 6 and that.
Oh, it was important, no, but it's important, thank you. Important book. Oh, you did.
Won't discriminate against
No.
the boards.
Yes.
All right, let's go.
We're in G5 now.
All right, let's
Sean.
go. Let's go. Oh, no.
Oh. The rebel too, the yellow and yellow.
I fog up. Yeah, I used the yellow on yellow. That was bad.
Do you like my Postit shop?
Yes. I did it.
Oh, I see, I thought it was all related to
I say one.
And that's what's been where I saw the 3 people.
Asked for me. Do it within 14 days.
You know,
There's a lot of.
All right, let's skip it. Come on, I'm gonna skip it. Oh.
Okay, so my next question, when you're all done, is gonna be, what did you learn through doing this? So this is your opportunity to take a minute to kind of go look and see what other people have done and see whether it matches what you think, so that we can just get a sense of the highlights here. It's okay. So the next question I'm gonna ask is, what did you learn from all this?
Okay, great.
So you prep for that.
Yeah. It's everywhere. I know, right? Oh, I see.
So let's listen to what they say, right? And then,
funny, that's when I was walking in, I was like, I should be like,
this is the piece where
Joe already called me out.
Yeah, so then you're.
That would have been bothering you.
Yeah, I need more jobs.
yeah.
For sale. That's for sale. That's for sale.
What happened now?
And Carrie would literally, like, what did he always, so the practical, the operational part of this is
Yeah.
that, you know, we have to walk away at some point and then.
I got one giant.
Yeah.
Literally some drafts of thoughts, I'd like them to be able to talk.
Totally, yep.
Yeah, definitely. That's the important piece even before really.
Yep.
I don't want that to be lost.
No, so you and I are gonna take really good notes.
So I wonder, Isabelle, is it smart to have you on to talk about the master agenda just a little bit and then come back to this and see how.
Is you
I wanna do that?
Yeah, I
That
think
makes
It's
perfect
just fair to
sense.
speak, I think, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think actually like if we, because I think it will help frame.
To frame it.
Yep.
Okay.
So, just let me ask one question.
Oh, absolutely.
And then I'm gonna
Right,
turn it
you
over
may.
to you. So, can you just talk to us a little bit about what you learned from doing this? What stood out to you?
I'll say that what stands out to me is that we're all different people with different backgrounds and different experiences, and therefore we have different priorities. And that's what I think makes this also challenging, but perhaps also makes it rewarding when we are able to come together and in the best interest of the schools.
Well, along those same lines, I've, you know, given our differing perspectives and our own dispositions, it was interesting how much similarity there was between priorities. They, you know, that they came, it seems like they came maybe perhaps from different sources, but they end up in the same place. And I think that's what, again, having a diverse board gives us.
I actually thought this was challenging, and as I kind of reflect on the task, and actually Kathleen, you brought it up, because Kathleen, when she was thinking about her Postits, she thought about those through using the vision of the graduate, right? She was thinking about the colorful chart.
Yep.
And then when she was asked to then categorize those based on this document, which was the Board of Education goals, it was more challenging.
It was very challenging.
Because, and in fact, what you brought up, Isabelle, and I actually had mentioned to Dr. Hanaway, is goal number 1, for example, is so broad that, and that doesn't, it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just that it's so broad that, like, for example, goal 3 fit right into there. And so I think the next level of conversation as we think about the vision of the graduate, the priorities of the board, and all of it perhaps comes together a little bit more. Maybe it won't be completely solidified. I wonder if, you know, things have to get messy before they get better. I wonder if these ideas will come, will tighten up a little bit. Because I think that it was actually more challenging than what I would have anticipated, at least on paper.
To jump on that, I felt it helped focus me thinking about the board priorities through the lens of the vision of the graduate. So I could still talk about finances, I could still talk about inclusion, I could still, you know what I'm saying? But I did them all with the vision of the graduate as being my home word or whatever. So-
I agree with you, but there's a lot of disconnect between, these don't flow at all. They're totally disconnected from each other. It's like they were by 2 different teams.
Okay, so can I just speak to that for a
Sure.
second? So I would suggest that it's the job of the district's instructional system, right? The curriculum and instruction and assessment plan to ensure that students acquire these characteristics, right? And that you are several steps removed from that instructional system, right? So if you were a group of teachers, I would be talking about backwards design. You know, that we start with the end in mind and we plan backwards from that. And so the first question that I would be asking, if this were strategic planning, I would be asking us to talk about then what should classrooms look like? And then what do teachers need in order to be able to teach that way? And then what are the conditions that need to be created so that that capacity can build and those teachers can teach that way? So there's this whole chain of causation that starts with you, but because it's several steps removed, you're gonna have to get very high level and kind of abstract about identifying the work of the board that will eventually lead to.
I agree with you, but if I was using this artifact as the end point and working backwards from it, I don't think my list would look anything like this, because very little of this, even when you look at it through this lens, focuses to this final artifact.
So what I think
That's
I'm hearing you
my
say
perspective.
is the goals of the board would shift had this been a board goal meeting, right? And this was your document of the vision of the graduate, these might have shifted as
I
a
don't know
result.
if they would have shifted
Or been revised.
Yeah, I think the high level that I see coming from this artifact is is different, but I don't think it's just my perspective that makes it different. I think they're completely misaligned.
I
don't think
can I
they
just ask a
necessarily
question? Can I
misaligned,
ask a
but-
question? Sorry, John, can I just ask a question? When you guys did the vision of the graduate, those of you that were on the board at that time, was there community stakeholder input outside of the school?
I was actually a community member at the time this was done, I wasn't on the board.
Okay, all right. So I
Yes.
just wonder, because the Board of Ed is an elected body by the people of the town, right? That's a different role than, and I just don't know if the people of the town were also included with the vision of the graduate, you know what I mean? And I'm just wondering about process question there. Because I think unless you do that, right, there's a totally different, potentially stakeholder group that you have to rationalize in here.
So I think I did this whole exercise a little bit differently, and I don't know if it's, well, there's no right and wrong to
None.
it, so, I didn't look at our goals, I looked at the vision, and I just kind of took it step by step. I said, as a board, first, we should either agree with this vision or agree to revise it. Then we should see how we're doing against it, being able to measure how we're doing in each of these different areas. Then have a plan to fill those gaps, and then the resources to fill that plan, and then the skills on staff to manage to it. So that's, and I didn't have any place to put little.
It was on the other one.
Right, which I think is the point that Sean was making.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Exactly.
I was not disagreeing.
No, I get it. There's very little in this that gives me a framework that tells me how we're doing against any of these things on this sheet over here. Like I said, it's like they were developed by two different teams in a vacuum that didn't talk to each other.
But I think there's some core capabilities of the board that is a little different than the vision of the graduate, right? We do have a fiscal accountability that the vision of the graduate, maybe we should teach them some fiscal accountability as a student, that the graduate can be fiscally accountable and good representative of their own finances and the world's finances, whatever. But I do think things like improved communication make sense for a board to have the goal, right?
But those don't necessarily support the vision of the graduate at all. There's nothing that translates.
Well,
That's-
That's part of our ability to get there.
If the board communicates well, then we will get the support for the initiatives that we need to do in the school. You could take, it's a stretch.
If you squint really hard, sure. You can.
Or you could demonstrate, like us demonstrating good communication and collaboration and teamwork and empathy and the mindfulness.
Unless that shows up in a classroom somewhere, I don't understand how that necessarily translates. Setting a good example is a,
Well, that's
That's
literally the vision of the graduate.
I get it, but
The four
that's-
things I just mentioned.
But I see the fiscal responsibility being so important as the board, providing the funds and the money necessary so that the teachers and administrators can carry out the work and have the materials and curriculum and PD to be able to make that happen.
And
to
the
assess it.
taxpayer, that the
So to me,
taxpayer
it tied in
can afford.
beautifully.
Right, that is accountable,
Yeah,
that is accountable
Accountability.
to those that pay property taxes and taxes.
yeah.
So I hear a little disconnect between the view that there ought to be a tighter tie between the board goals or the board priorities and the vision of the graduate. And kind of on the flip side of that, that there are responsibilities of the board that are separate from and constant, where the connection, the coupling is not as tight, but is necessary nonetheless. Communication being one, fiduciary responsibility being another. It wouldn't really matter what the vision of the graduate said, those would still have to exist.
But if we were looking for a connection, I mean, the fiscal responsibility and collaboration could definitely be one element, as well as, perhaps, being innovative and critical thinking in how we arrive at solutions. I mean, if we're looking to make those kinds of
And
language connections.
I wonder, is that what we're attempting to do? though?
Right, that's what
I
I'm
don't
not
think
sure.
we're attempting to do that. I think when, please correct me if I'm wrong, Isabelle, but when the intent of the vision of the graduates were a part of the accreditation process with NEOSC, it was really asking school districts, and yes, there were community stakeholders on many of them, not on all of them, but on many of them, to identify, put the Board of Education out of it for a second, to identify what do we believe that our students in 12th grade should look like when they depart the Ridgefield Public Schools? They go on to bigger and better things, right, whatever that is. What do we expect that the skills, disposition, characteristics of our children are? Separate and distinct. Now, when we think about the priority, the goals, right, we keep calling them priorities, but the goals of the Board of Education are overarching that vision, right? In support of, or we agreed upon at some point in 2017-18 that this was what our student looked like. As a result of that, what are the responsibilities, all of which you said, and many of which are here, by the way, that are on this document, whether you're looking at fiscal responsibility or communication. That's not necessarily communication to be sure that our kids are communicating, but rather, how are we communicating as a Board of Education to support the work that our school leaders, our teachers are doing in support of this vision. And so perhaps I'm looking at it a little bit differently. I think what happened here in this task is we identified first, using that vision of the graduate, what do we believe our priorities should be to support that? In many of our responses did that, right? Many of our responses, whether it's being sure that we have the resources available, being sure that we support our curriculum initiatives, consistency, right? All of those things ended up here, and some other things that perhaps weren't necessarily connected to this, but still were connected to the overarching responsibility of a Board of Education, which Margaret will talk about later, is some land beautifully, and then some are just kind of have-tos that you have to do. And so, Sean, to your point, it may not match up perfectly, but I think it is the overarching work that supports the educators, really, that are working towards this end goal. And that's, operationally, that's what we do, right? I'm hoping that this supports that.
Yeah, but if we qualify with the abstraction layer you just put in, which is it supports a team that does this, that's a lot different than viewing this through this prism,
Yeah,
because you can't.
Yeah.
Or it's difficult to do.
Yeah.
But if you frame it with like I said, with an abstraction layer between the two, then it's easier to imagine.
yeah, I agree. I think that's what was a little bit hard about the task.
Anything else? How would you like to frame this in terms of the master agenda?
It's truly just a framing, I'm not sure if there's an exercise after as to how.
Yes, we're gonna come back to this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's truly just, it's just a reminder, obviously, that board meetings are business meetings of the board held in public, so it's to discuss and take action together collectively. We heard Rebecca talk about that earlier. Even though the board chair and the superintendent set the agenda, as Dr. De Silva just mentioned, there are some non-negotiables that come up every year that we have to take action on, or at least discuss. Some of these are dictated by policy, and if you look through our policies and bylaws, you can see what those are. I have a list of them. Others are just by practice, things like the enrollment report. That's not in the policy book, but that is always the first meeting in October. We also like to have items that hold us accountable to decisions from the prior year. I call it closing the loop on new initiatives from the year before. So that could look like we approved some new classes for the high school last year. We'd like to get a report back on were those held, how was the curriculum rating for them, so things like that. Those are the typical, just baseline non-negotiables that need to be on any agenda. But the master agenda also should include strategic work of the board. And we've talked about elements of innovation, the longer term vision that are beyond just policy and the budget. That's an opportunity, we'd like all of you, again, even though it's Dr. De Silva and the board chair who set the agenda, this is the opportunity for all of us to do that together. We want to hear the voices because, as we heard, there are different perspectives. We want this to be inclusive. As we think about what those agenda items should be, I would just ask everyone to consider, again, asking yourself, how does this support and advance the vision of the graduate work? How will we have a productive conversation around whatever that topic might be? How would it be productive? We're not just going to put something out there that doesn't have something that we're moving toward. And then where does the conversation start? Does it start at the committee level? All things that are in the committee do come before the full board, but they often are discussed at a little bit more detailed level in the committee and fleshed out a little bit more before they come to the full board. The other thing to keep in mind is that often we have to prioritize the list of things for the agenda. As we've seen around, there's probably a lot of different things that could, take up a lot of board agendas. We could have a lot of special meetings this year, so we obviously have to prioritize that. For a number of reasons, some of it is based on information availability. The other is, quite honestly, the resource of time. The administration, they're lean. They do an incredible amount of work for us. I think we've seen the quality of that work, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that we can't be asking them, if they're constantly preparing for a board meeting that's coming in 2 weeks, it's hard for them to get some of their day jobs done. So we just have to be cognizant of what we're asking them to do. And that's where the collaboration with Dr. DeSilva comes in very well, because she speaks on behalf of the administration. But another thing to consider is also time sensitivity. Is there something coming up that is time sensitive and we just need to put on an agenda now because it needs to be discussed sooner rather than later for whatever that reason may be. And there's been plenty of those that have come up in the past. The other thing I just would ask everybody to do, that as we go through this exercise, again, there's a lot of Postits out there, just think of your number one most important priority and how that might come onto an agenda and when. If you could only pick one thing, like what of the things that you put around or saw, what would that be? And I think that'll be helpful too as we talk about the master agenda setting. That's it.
So just something that I'm just thinking out loud, Isabelle, that I noticed is that some of the Postits are very concrete things that people want discussed perhaps or are priorities for them. And some I think are a little bit more dispositions, right? So I'm just having to look over here and it says, there's a lot of Postits on this one, by the way. A lot of stickers. The board should be mindful in their discussions, showing respect to one another. That's not necessarily something that's gonna go on a master agenda, right? I'm assuming. That's just a disposition, right? That's something that we would expect. So as we're talking about either the Postits with a lot of stickers, maybe we could just think about which ones are action items or discussion items versus these are the dispositions that, and that comes into the next part of the conversation or the next part of the agenda today, is how do we work productively as we move forward, and I think the dispositions piece of this can lean into that
Right.
a bit.
So let's just separate those out, right, for clarity. So I'm gonna repeat your list as I wrote it down of suitable items for the board agenda. Connection to the vision of the graduate, productive, not performative, where does the discussion start, right? So it may be identified as a suitable item for board discussion, but it may not come to the board immediately, is what I hear you saying. That there has to be some sense of prioritizing and sequencing, which is a lot of what the work that the board chair and the superintendent do in terms of figuring out the agenda throughout the year. And then time sensitivity, urgency. Right, and then what you're talking about is the process by which the work is done, right? So, the operating agreements, so to speak, right? And so that's a separate portion of the agenda, which we will get to once we've had this discussion. And just to preview that for you, this district, as many districts in the state, uses the Ruler program out of Yale, nationally known, very highly regarded. And they have a process called a charter. So all classrooms using the Ruler program involve students in creating this charter. And so we're gonna go through that process with you. So that'll just provide you with a little education as to what Ruler looks like out there in the schools. Plus it's just a useful tool for making sure that people are able to verbalize the needs that they have as they go through a collaborative process. So that's the next thing. Yes?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, good.
Yep.
So the question I'm going to ask is so we're asking you to synthesize. Having heard the guidelines about what are appropriate agenda items, having seen not just what you've written, and not just what other people have written, but also what people think is really important. we now would like you to start generating your ideas for what really belongs on the master agenda. So again, I'm just gonna give you some time to write or to go look, right? So to refresh yourself. And then I'm gonna go around and ask everyone to speak. You don't have to duplicate what's already been said, right? So this is additive, cumulative, right? So, and it's okay to pass, and it's all right if we come back. We'll just make sure that everyone gets a chance to say what they think is really the top line items.
So just as a framework reference, what I shared
yeah,
with
thank
you
you.
is just it's a timeline that we use here in Ridgefield, just gives you a sense of our Board of Education meetings, there's a calendar attached, you don't necessarily need to do anything with it, but just, you get a sense of which committees are meeting, what items are sort of those staple items, as Margaret described a little bit better than I just did, but those things that happen at those particular times of the year, and there's probably many more, things like calendar and COVID policies and all that other stuff that comes up, but it just gives you a sense of how we kind of look forward. And again, it's a draft, right? Lots of things come up, and so it can evolve and change. Okay, so now you can
gonna give you time to think and write.
You can go back to any one of these charts if you want to revisit it.
Do we put them on Post-its or just write them down?
No, if you just write them down, because we're actually gonna get people to say them out loud.
Okay.
And this is not their only opportunity for input, right?
Right, correct.
Just checking.
I think it's a first opportunity, right?
First opportunity.
First, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we should make sure that we have photographs of these before.
Yeah, you know what, that happened in Darien, somehow the chart, they did like a part of his entry plan, the chart papers got thrown away, and he was trying to write an entry plan, he had none of the information. The PTA president, he was embarrassed to ask her, it was like 3 months later, he's like, by chance, did you notice anyone that took down the chart paper? And she's like, no, but I have pictures, and he was like, oh my God, oh my God.
Do you have one of those scanner apps on your phone?
I don't, but I'll take pictures, that's
I
fine.
think the cameras on the phones now will scan for you anyway. Magic. And I know the person's name.
It's called
Who's the person's name too? John.
John.
John. You're taking this seriously.
See that ring in my forehead, right?
You're your best friend.
Yeah, that's on mine too. Those are my two, those are my two.
Great, that's on mine.
You are cheating.
I was on your own paper.
No.
I'm just like,
Here's
okay, my day starts with the superintendent's budget to use, and then after that, we will be visiting a lot.
So I'm just gonna start with him.
Jonathan?
Yes, is that all right?
Yeah.
Just go around.
did. Or just, what is the most important thing, or a couple of things?
Yeah, what they would prioritize, I think, is the frame. Is it okay to start? Yeah, we good? Jonathan, is it all right if we start with you?
Sure.
Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
Would you please tell us what you would prioritize in terms of setting the board agenda items?
Items that I would think.
Items that you would prioritize if you were setting the board agenda.
I would I've got 1, 2, 3, I've got 7 here.
Oh my gosh, I don't think.
Let's take your top three.
Top 3, an assessment of our achievement against our vision of the graduate. Our options for talented, gifted, and advanced students. And the varied post-school option paths.
What?
The preparing for various post-high school paths.
Oh, okay. Thanks, sorry.
You don't want the other one?
We'll come back to you.
Okay.
Can we just keep going?
Okay, I thought we were only supposed to pick one, I might not have. Okay, my top one was technology, making it accessible and strategically implementing it only after extensive PD, and making sure we keep in place technology supports for every level from K to 12, so.
John, do you have anything, or skipping? Skip. Okay. Sean?
I'd like to talk a little bit more about parity between the different schools, especially the elementary school. We have 6 different schools, and sometimes parity can be a challenge. Demographics, I know given the COVID challenge, things may be on a different path, but deeper dive into where we are, where we're going in terms of how many kids, district, redistricting, do we need it, are we good? But again, with COVID, that could change, and same thing with transportation, that's always been a huge budget item that we've never really gotten to the bottom of. I think we need to do a deep dive on it.
You skipping?
No, I had 3, if you want to hear them.
Go for it, John.
Plexiglass.
Plexiglass. No, the 3 that resonated with me, again, options for gifted and advanced learners. And then a greater investment in technology facilities through capital. And options for more innovative curriculum.
Yeah.
Not bad, huh?
No, it's good. Joe?
That's my bedtime.
It's a fever dream.
Okay, I guess I was overarching, so I have a few. So the first, I thought, most important thing we have to completely do is work with the superintendent to create and support a budget that's fiscally responsible and ensures an enriching and accountable educational experience for all learners in the Ridgefield Public Schools, so it learns to a successful outcome for the vision of the graduate. But another one I was thinking about is, of course, consistently review curriculum consistency and have opportunities to review, update, assessments of that and accountabilities, and to look at the needs of those who need support as well as enrichment. And then I guess, again, another one, I guess, that I just always view as an important part of our work is continue to review all our policies, that they're updated, to ensure the safety, health, and well-being for all students as well as faculty, and that they support our educational goals. I didn't get as much into the weeds as.
Karen, passing?
No, I had just two things that,
Yeah.
one is that I would like to see, or I think that the topic of the curriculum, and understanding that is important to be discussed at the board level. I think we have a tendency to have that happen during budget discussions, and that should occur outside of the budget. And then just as looking at and understanding the vision of the graduate, the competencies there, you know, we talk a lot about athletics and things like that, but I don't think we talk in front of you about more of our extracurriculars and how we're supporting students in other things in our club activities and what we offer K-12 to our students.
Liz?
Okay, I have a few, and some of them are a bit piling on, but one of the big ones is we have to look at the future in terms of our building strategy, both from a physical facilities perspective. We've got maintenance challenges, we've got sizing challenges, we've got aging buildings all over town, and I think we need to be bold about looking at what the age of those buildings really is and what their capacity for the future really is. It's been proven during this time that our technology, the way that we interact in the hallways is all changing. We need to be realistic that technology infrastructure is not going to go away. It's going to get more advanced. And so we need to look at enrollment trends. We need to look at ways of teaching trends. We need to look at those facilities in terms of age and veracity for the future. And the longer this goes on, we're just kicking the can. We know we have buildings that are old, let's just say. And so we need to start thinking about that with the town and talking to our stakeholders, both on the town level and the voting level, to ensure that we have a good, solid strategy there. Enrollment has been declining, Connecticut's population is declining, our taxes are going up higher than any other state in the nation. These are unsustainable trends at a macro level that this board is going to be accountable for at some point, whether we're on it or not. So the second one that's just one. The second one that I have is legislative positions. This board has been silent on legislative activity that can devastate the schools of Ridgefield, both school regionalization, removal of funding for certain things, including SROs and other things that are happening on the federal and state level. And I have yet to see in my tenure in Ridgefield any board statement on these things. And I think it behooves us to put that on the agenda every single time we meet, if there is any legislative activity, to let the public speak, and we hear them, and then we speak for them for those things that can impact the RPS schools. The third thing is forecasting and innovation. This goes along a little bit with the transportation item. We don't use data that's accessible to the board anyway for very good forecasting around some of our costs. We miss some things as a result. You know, we've got to look at that. Transportation is a huge line item. I've seen no innovation in my tenure on the board, which is relatively short, in terms of how we do that. During COVID, we've got buses stopping and opening their doors at every single stop because we have to, quote unquote, yet we haven't put out any position to our legislators to say that's kind of silly. And so I think we've got some opportunities there to think more innovatively, to hear from our community. We've got brilliant, talented people all over Ridgefield that we could have help us. So the other thing, I'm just going to pile on the curriculum. I think we have some opportunities to ensure it's unbiased and that the community supports those things and that the community is aware of the curriculum decisions that are being made, and we have the best darn curriculum in Connecticut because that's what people are here for and they deserve. And with that,
Thank you.
give the floor.
Liz?
Nothing that hasn't already been said. For me, number one is definitely what are the assured experiences that kids have, curriculum-wise, for sure. A technology strategic plan, 1, 3, 5 years. And the focus on the piece that Jonathan brought up around students having very post-high school paths.
Oh, I'm sorry, I took over your job.
That's great.
You know what, I realized you probably didn't know the first things anyway, sorry. Oops, sorry, Ken.
Okay. No, that's okay. Again, as Liz said, it's a little bit of piling on. So I will avoid that. I think one of the things that I just even led to our discussion is maybe we need to, is one of our first priorities is revisiting our goals. And maybe, because that's gonna set the framework for everything else that follows. So maybe we should take a look at that. And then again, a little bit along what Liz was saying, is access, is improving the access for public comment. And how can we, you know, again, we're working in very difficult circumstances now, or very different circumstances anyway. And how can we improve, you know, give the public more access for their input, you know, sort of beyond electing us to the board.
Rachel? Yeah, so I have a couple. The first one that I was thinking was on thinking of reaching all learners. Perhaps an overview in technology with our students, thinking of prep for real life situations, what we're proud of, what we could look to change, hardware, software, apps. I was going back to the vision of the graduate. I was thinking of the term, you know, collaborative, working together. You think technology, you think of working together. Communicative, innovative, different tech devices, resilient. I thought of assistant technologies. You know, it also has budgetary implications. So I thought, you know, as we're going into budget season, to see maybe what we need would be important to communicate out to the community as well. Another topic would be co-teaching. I would love to hear about that. Having co-taught myself in middle school, I'd like to hear about perhaps what that would look like on the elementary school level. It also has budgetary implications. Another would be consistency among the 6 elementary schools. It's something that I hear about a lot. Also, the gifted and talented options for our students. Like Liz, I also would love to see SROs on a future agenda so that we could talk about our positivity and our support for our SROs in our district. I also have a recommendation too, as a possible action item. I believe this would be a possible action item. So CABE actually sent out an advocacy highlight on August 18th, 2020, and it has to do with the legislation with SROs. And it says, U.S. Senator Chris Murphy has filed legislation on prohibiting school resource officer funding. And in here, it speaks about how many school districts have expressed concerns on this proposal, as they have long-standing memorandums with local police departments, and those understandings specifically detail the many supportive ways the school resource officers contribute to a positive school climate. And then it says that the Connecticut Association of Urban Superintendents wrote to the U.S. Senator Murphy expressing their strong support for SROs, while also acknowledging that, yes, more social workers and counselors would be a great benefit, and the letters attached. And then CABE said, if your district has an SRO, please let Senator Murphy know the positive way their presence is guiding your district. So if we do bring up the SRO agenda item, I would love that to be a possible action item that as a board we could positively write a letter and say the way that we feel in our district. A positive presence. And I have one more. Actually, two more. Sorry. So another one would be on the reopening plan. So underneath the social and emotional heading, I just want to make sure that our staff and our administrators feel supported by us as a Board of Education. And we do have there that we would perhaps do some virtual town halls just to hear feedback. Again, as we heard tonight, our only authority is at the table. So this would be more of a community outreach, but to our staff by Board of Education members.
So Jonathan, I cut you off after 3. Was there anything?
Consistency across buildings and curriculum, Sean. Technology, a couple of people, communication plans and opportunities for soliciting more feedback, Ken, and physical plan. So I think I was covered.
Thank you. Madam Chair.
Well, all the, I would say, technology strategic plan, long-term, both the IT as well as the teaching and learning, how technology supports that. Transportation, I too would like to, move some of that along. Some of the follow-up from things that were discussed last year, we talked about security strategies, in a meeting last February, which included, physical as well as cybersecurity. I'd like to hear a little bit more about updates with that. Again, something like classes at the high school, we'd like to hear, did they run? How were they received by the students? I think that helps inform us if we're placed with, new classes again, and we know what truly students are interested in. I'd like to hear a little bit about how are we measuring the success of our kids against these things that are identified in the vision of the graduate. We hear about SBACs and all those kinds of quantitative scores. I'd like to hear a little bit more about how measures for the whole child, or how are we doing against this. I think we've talked about that before, but I don't think we've nailed it. So a little bit of thinking around that. And I too would like a little bit more, curriculum consistency across the schools and perhaps some innovation in that.
Not too much then. So is there anything else that you need to get out of this part of the conversation?
I think if I could ask a little bit more about, so on the SROs thing, because I know you've just mentioned, and I know Liz, you had brought it up as well about the legislation, and you wanted to share. Yep. Do you want to share a little bit more about the?
Yeah, what was your question, though? I don't want to.
No, because I know you asked for have it on an agenda, so I wanted to
Yeah.
understand a little bit more about that.
So my recommendation was the agenda has a standing item for any legislation that could impact the Ridgefield Public Schools, and that this board stops remaining silent on those legislative bodies, especially those that are at a federal level supported by an elected official in Connecticut primarily. This bill in particular is egregious, and it says that any district will remove federal funds if it has any agreement with any police department, which means security and other factors, and we have a strong partnership with the RPD. I'd like to understand what the public feels about that, and we represent that public, and then we make a statement that the board can agree on and vote on. However, there are other bills that will come up over the course of time, over the course of this year, that are either being bandied about during campaign season, or may come up as actual legislation that I think this board has a responsibility to ensure that we are aware of if they're going to impact our local schools and our local kids, because it certainly impacts the vision of the graduate, it impacts our taxpayers. And there are, so that was my ask, was that we start looking at that as a standing agenda item and determine in that agenda period if there is something that is coming up that has impact on our schools or could, and what our stance is on it, because the public deserves to have a forum to hear those things. So this one in particular is a urgent need. It has been filed. It is HR bill. I don't have the exact number on it, but I actually have it printed out. And you can read it, and it's called the Counseling Not Criminalization in Schools Act, and it has some very direct impact, not only from a taxpayer perspective at $2.5 billion, but also would literally any federal funding we would lose if we had any agreement with a police officer or a police department. And that's how
So
it's written.
I just wanted to, do we get any federal funding on the?
We do not get any federal funding for our SROs, Dawn. They're funded.
No, this isn't for
Federal
SROs. This
funding
removes
agreement.
all federal funding if you have an agreement with the police department. All.
CARES Act funding, gone.
Gone. That's the way it's written. Now, this hasn't been all the way through the
Right,
legislative
right.
however, now's the time to intervene on that particular item. And I know we can't, it's not an agenda topic for tonight, even though I've asked for it several times at this point as other board members. But I think you should all read it, because the way it's written is pretty broad.
And I think we need to remember why the SROs are there in the first place. We're pretty close to Sandy Hook, and we had a board that voted for them to be there for a reason.
And I think that
They
they
provide
provide a
value.
valuable partnership for our schools. I mean, look at the graduations. We couldn't have pulled off half of the stuff we did this year without our partnerships with the RPD. I think this is a wonderful town with strong community partnerships, and we should probably support that. So, and read the bill, because I can tell you.
I did, I missed the
times.
fact that it was all, I
Yeah.
thought that it was just SRO related.
Yeah, this is very, very direct. And it also has a bunch of additional things that the schools would have to implement, which obviously has other implications, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Margaret,
Go
correct me
ahead.
if I'm wrong, but I think we used to get, at meetings, Fran was our legislative liaison with the district, and we actually have sent letters out about some of the legislation in my tenure here. Do we
It would
have
be the
somebody
same-
who is that person?
It would be the same mechanism as it has been. It's the legislative liaison typically would bring that up under reports at the end of the, or actually no, at the beginning of the meeting. To be able to bring up if there's any legislation that they feel impacts us locally from a Board of Education standpoint. So that's the
But
mechanism.
that's not a decision point, right? That report out isn't actually a decision.
No, but it can lead to, because then people become aware of what that legislation is. For instance, with the regionalization, as I mentioned, we actually did write quite a few letters last year. They're actually posted on our website. But it started out with a conversation that came as a result of the report of the legislative liaison, and then we decided to make it an agenda item and got consensus on the letter.
And we did move those reports to the beginning of the meeting so that we could potentially add action
Correct.
items later on in the meeting.
Correct.
So it's
So I
part
don't know if
of,
that answered your question, though.
so it's a part of the agenda now, or it's not?
Having the legislation liaison meeting?
Yes.
For the legislative, that's a liaison position, it's like any report, so that could be that's at the beginning of the meeting, so we can certainly, I think this year it's been weird because of the special sessions and
Sure.
stuff as to when, but we can certainly make sure that it's highlighted on there, that that's at the beginning, and Liz, you can report. As far as the SROs, if we want to talk, it does sound like there's some time sensitivity there. I mean, I know that 3 members of the board had brought up that they were interested in putting it on. If others would like to, we can talk about that being one where there's some sensitivity and putting it on sooner rather than later, if that's.
Yeah, I don't think it's a new agenda item. At least 3 of us have gone around email to suggest that it become an agenda item, because it is flowing through.
Next Tuesday's good.
Well, I think, so I guess, so here's where we would want to talk about what is it that, so I know that there is a piece of legislation, and there might be a request to do an action about that legislation. I think, again, here, trying to understand how is that productive for the board, and what information does the board need then to be able to make that informed decision? So I feel like, so yes, we could put it on next Tuesday, but I don't know that necessarily the board will have all of the information that it needs in terms of what is it that the SROs do in our schools, besides just the security piece. We know that they're involved in some of the curriculum. What are those things that they do? And I think that the administration would need some time to be able to pull it together. Next Tuesday feels like it's too soon. Could it be the agenda after that? Possibly.
Yeah, before we discuss it in depth, I mean, I like the informative piece. I first would like to be informed about what they do and how successful they are doing it in that light, and how they're, by the community, because I don't really know.
But I would just challenge that a little bit. So, and in challenging that, I would say the decision should be local, regardless of whether or not our SROs, that's an administrative decision, right? Whether or not we have SROs in our school or not. This takes away that decision from this Board of Education and from this administration. So I would just say that one of the things that I would encourage you all to read it, because it actually says that you no longer get that decision. It doesn't matter what an SRO does. It doesn't matter if that helps. This takes away your opportunity to even have that conversation. So as a piece of legislation, it's poorly written from that perspective if you believe that the federal government shouldn't run the Ridgefield Public Schools. So I would just, that would be something I would just encourage you to think about.
What's the number?
When I printed it out, it didn't pull the number. It's actually blanked on the.
You can just Google Senator Murphy and SROs, it comes right up.
Senator Murphy, yes,
Yeah, 774 something, but it doesn't print out on this particular.
Yes, I saw that, I had seen that, yeah.
It's called the Counseling Not Criminalization in Schools Act.
So then, So would board members then, so I'm hearing a little bit more information about what that we would want to know, more information about what it is that the SROs do for us currently.
Margaret, can I just ask a clarifying question? Who is the legislative liaison on this board?
I think it's me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Liz. So, okay, so then just going back to that point then, would that be part of, let's just say on whatever meeting dates, September 29th, the legislative update? And then I think what you're asking is then, so she would provide that legislative, I think you're asking then, Liz, is to, then we could add that as an action item on that same board meeting, let's say to take a position, to write a letter to whomever. Is that what we're
Yes.
debating now?
Well, we are, but it sounded like from some board members that in order to be able to get to that action step and to be able to make an informed decision about that action, they wanted to have other information about what the SROs do before they could
Well-
have a, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree. Well, I think we could very easily have that as a discussion item on the 29th. I mean, just the legislative update, this is coming down the line. And then at the subsequent meeting on the 13th, I think we could then get the information on exactly what the SROs do for us from different schools, from the different perspectives of the administration. And then we could write a letter of support for our SROs, as Rachel described, and that could be the action item for the 13th.
Right, and in that, when the legislation, when it's being discussed on the 29th, hopefully the community will hear it, and we can get some feedback from the community as well.
Yeah, so that gives us, that 2 weeks gives us that, yep.
That's right. That's right.
Sounds good. Is that acceptable? Great.
So outside of that topic,
Yeah.
if I could just say some of the things that I've noticed with, this is what I would expect. Of course, there's 100 things that everybody listed, right? So over the course of the year, I'm not sure we could get to all 100, but we could certainly compact. And if I think back to our, 6 o'clock time, right, when you noticed what patterns emerged outside of this Board of Education, community members, stakeholders, teachers, administrators, many of the same patterns emerged, even in that small little bucket list, right? It seems like 5 little things. So I think if we can sit down and compact, Margaret, some of what's outside of the SROs, because that's clearly something that's relevant and timely. I don't know if there's anything else that's relevant or timely here, but if not, I'd like to have an opportunity to just see where we can compartmentalize some of these topics, and then also see where they fall within the committee structures as well. And I'm thinking about some of the building or facilities and those topics, and some of them may not necessarily be at this moment a Board of Ed item. I mean, eventually we'll get there, but perhaps that's an update from a facilities group or a strategic planning group.
Right.
Yes, because I think now that you've had your 6 months plus here, as well as talking to other administrators and teachers and paras and other members of the community, you can bring some more context to that as you compact them too, because I think it's going to be your work as well, so I appreciate that.
And I think what's really, if I just may say, what I think is really important about this and having a Board of Education identify, even if it's buckets of priorities for the year, is that we maintain that. I know, at least I will speak to my transition into Ridgefield. There were one-offs that were happening, right? That I was spending a lot of time on. And as a result of me spending a time on the one-offs, and not to say that they weren't important, right? They were important. But as a result of that, then other work doesn't get done. There's only so many hours in a day, right? For my administrative team and for myself and for our school-based leaders. So I think the more that we can prioritize and say, okay, if we want a deeper dive into athletics, let's just say, there'll be a place for that, whether it's a committee and or a retreat or something like tonight, then that's the place for it, because otherwise it takes time away from what matters most. And I think it was a good way to start our day, just coming back or our night and saying, this is our ultimate goal, right? All the other stuff gets us there, hopefully, but this is our ultimate goal. No, I was just gonna say, I don't know if anyone else feels that there's anything that's time sensitive that needs to be, let's say, on September 29th or October 13th, but if not, I think Margaret, you and I could take this information and compact it and start drafting the agenda for the year, at least a draft, right?
Is there anything else? I just want to look around to make sure there wasn't anything else that anybody else felt was pressing or time sensitive.
Was there, because I know we've talked a little bit about the goals themselves. So is that something we're comfortable moving through the year with, or is now a good time to revisit the goals that will guide us through the next year?
Those are board-led goals, so I'll leave those to you. I will say that I think they're broad enough that just in the scope of the work, we can.
Sure. Okay.
It may be something that you come back to at your retreat next year, our retreat next year in the summer, like typical, right? And revisit. I do think they're broad enough, but that's their board goals, so I'll leave that to you. And
Well, they currently take us through that time period, so.
yes.
All right.
You're good? All right, so Isabel's gonna get us through the touchy-feely stuff now. That's the way I'm sorry. I believe in it though.
You have the clicker.
I do have the clicker, I'm
Do you
sorry.
wish to speak to the next couple of slides and talk
Sure.
any more about
Sure.
Ruhr
I actually-
and the Ridgefield Public
So
Schools?
I added these in since our last.
Yes.
See, that's probably why you want me to talk through them.
I can talk about them if you prefer, but I know how much you like the touchy-feely stuff.
Yeah, so, as you know, we are a rural district of course, we work with children, so emotions are incredibly important. In fact, if I were to go back to many of these Postits, they were about those types of dispositions, right? Those emotional dispositions. And so we thought that, going back to the purpose of tonight and being as productive as we can, you know, what does ruler really mean in schools, and how can it engage in a Board of Education's work? And so ruler skills help people of all ages. It's not just about kids, it's not just about faculty. How to really use their emotions wisely, right? Opening opportunities for us to succeed, whether it's at school, at work, or in life. And we know that, you know, 90% of the people that get let go from their job, it's not because they didn't have the skills, but they couldn't get along with people, right? And or couldn't get along with themselves. So these skills are both important socially and personally. The ruler has an acronym, and here it is. Recognizing emotions in oneself and others, understanding the causes and consequences of those emotions, labeling emotions with nuanced vocabulary, expressing emotions in accordance with cultural norms and social context, and lastly, regulating emotions with helpful strategies. So that's just a little bit of background, just to know how we got here. And then we thought about a charter for the board, and just taking everything that we've gotten to today, and we had a productive meeting today, and I'm glad that as a result of that, we can start memorializing for the work for the school year. So we were trying to, this is what you didn't see, I was trying to find in words that, like metric and achievement and outcomes, to add to those words such as feel. So I have those feeling words there because that really is part of ruler. So I'll turn it over to Isabelle to help us work through the charter for ourselves, knowing that in order to be productive, we have to be able to engage really well with one another, and we have to express how we get there and how we can support one another to do that. That's it. That's my touchy-feely for the day.
Okay, so this speech is about how it's not really touchy-feely. So, I don't consider myself a touchy-feely person. I've been known to say some really, outrageous things, like I really just don't care how you feel. But I'm particularly sensitive to the idea that emotions are touchy-feely, because as a coach, people expect me to be touchy-feely, warm, fuzzy, and I am not. I'm perfectly sociable, right? I'm really quite charming. I can be funny. But it's not about feeling in the sense of feeling good, right? This is not what we're talking about. So speaking to you now as an organizational psychologist, I can tell you that actually your emotions are incredibly important to your ability to make good decisions, right? People who are not capable of understanding their own emotions, of empathizing with others, of understanding how their emotions affect their problem solving and their decision making, generally make very poor decisions. This is why ruler ends up in the school district. It is definitely because we want students to be happy and healthy, but it is not just because we want students to be happy and healthy. It is also because we want them to recognize how their emotions impact them, how their emotions impact others, and vice versa, right? What the impact is of other people's emotions are on them and their contribution to that dynamic. So we're never going to the words touchy-feely again. It's gone. So you as adults are not immune. In fact, actually, the role of emotions is maybe buried a little deeper, but is just as impactful on you as it is on younger students, right? You may be more self-aware and you may be better able to self-regulate. You may even be more empathetic. But how you feel about the work has enormous influence on the way in which you engage the work and how invested you are, right? And the quality of the decisions that you make. So we're definitely interested in this from a cognitive perspective, right? We're not just interested in it because we want you to feel good. So please take a few minutes and write down your answers to these questions. Yes.
Included a chart that I think would be helpful.
Right, so I left those up because they're just larger, right?
Yes, so I'll type into it, so I have it.
We can flip it over, because you've got slides open there, right?
Yeah.
So when we flip it over to the next slide.
It'll be filled in.
That's beautiful.
Nicely done.
That's very clever.
We're just gonna have to talk fast since my computer's meant to do
Great. Do you want me to get mine out?
this. No, I'll have those two, just in case. Dr. Hanley, look at slide 22, just in case I die. You can.
I'm looking at it right now.
Slide 22.
Twenty-two of what?
Of 24, of 24.
48 would be off.
We can always go back to Rebecca's 100 slides.
Shouldn't really have a hundred.
There were a lot of them. I should have judged that better.
Maybe I'm imagining.
That's called modify and adjust.
That was quite fun.
It was, I was like, wait, what?
Rachel, I'm gonna be starting with you this time.
Or, oh no, okay, I think I'm ready.
Is it, well, I'm not sure everyone's ready. Is everyone ready?
Pencils down, Ken. That's over.
Oh, it's okay, she can talk, I'm good.
Are you good? I really don't want to talk
No,
to you.
no, I was good. I was
Okay,
writing clarifying notes for myself.
that's good. I deeply appreciate that.
And less than that, we will.
All right, I think we're ready.
Okay, yep, okay. So I think as a board member to feel valued and heard, I think for number 2, in order to feel this way, you need to empathize, you need to listen to the other people. You need to take time to understand, and also hopes that those people will take time to see you and to understand you and where you're coming from. If we're talking about a particular topic and there's a certain response, well, why is she responding in that way? What is her background? And I think for the third question, how to handle conflict, this is something, even as adults, I think we could fail at sometimes. But I think to pause, reflect, and then answer is very important. And sometimes the answer could or should be, I'll get back to you, or I'll think about that, or let's have a conversation tomorrow.
Thank you. So I have instructions for you.
Me?
So you don't have to repeat anything, but you can choose to repeat. If you like, we'll know. But now you have the floor.
Sounds good. So yes, I will repeat. 2, I think that to help to achieve our goals, I think we do need to be heard. We need to be appreciated, but I think we need to be impactful. So I need to, we need to feel like we've made a difference. And to do these, we need to be heard. We need to be able to express our thoughts and ideas. So we need to create a safe space for that, and we need to actually express them. And I don't think anyone here has that problem. And we actually need to create value in order to be impactful. The appreciation is a little tougher because we don't have direct control over that. And we can hope that we're appreciated, and I think a good way to do that is to listen to the community and listen to our, the people that elevated us to this position, and then we need to respond to their needs. And what's important to them, it needs to be important to us, and I think that's how we get that appreciation. Dealing with conflict, again, comes down to listening to different perspectives, and trying to see, again, taking into account sort of the background, where that person's experiences, and what are they bringing, what events in their life are bringing them to their position. How, had you had similar, how does that affect your view of the position? And I just think it comes down to listening and understanding.
I'm gonna pass.
Okay, so in order to achieve our goals, I think we need to feel that this is a nonpartisan group when we walk in the door. Unfortunately, there has been some things that I think we've aligned with people outside of the room instead of the constituents that we represent inside the room as a whole. And so that is important to me, that this isn't a party line type thing. I think it's unfortunate that we even have to have it that way, right? There are boards in other states that are nonpartisan, and it would be a lovely thing. And so in order to do that, we need to make sure that we're transparent and we don't feel like things are being manipulated or ignored that are brought up by potentially someone you don't agree with. And both sides, all three sides, right? When we handle conflict, I think conflict is healthy and we should have debates. If COVID has proven anything, it's that the way we've always done things isn't the way we can do them in the future. And in order to, I guess I don't see conflict. Conflict is just a disparity of ideas that should be debated. That's why we're here, that's why we're all representing different perspectives, different experiences, different sets of feedback from the people that we talk to in the community, and we need to respect that and debate that out. Conflict shouldn't be ignored. It should be embraced and come away with innovative new ideas as a result of that. So those are my thoughts on that.
Number one, I think we have to feel and realize that this work is for our entire community of students, not our personal agendas, and therefore, but we have to be empathetic and try to see others' perspectives. For the second one, how can we do, what do we do? Don't take it personally. Listen, learn, and focus on our goals and the strength of the work that we can do. And then finally, how can we handle it? First of all, I think calmly and respectfully, while remaining committed to the data, perspectives, and community's needs, and then continue to present our goals and our ideas in a respectful manner, but clearly and transparently.
All right. Lopez? All right, number one, we need to be positive and feel supported by other board members, by board leadership, and by our public, because ultimately that's why we're here. We all come from diverse backgrounds, we all have different experiences that brought us to Ridgefield, that, we grew within Ridgefield even, and we have different ideas on ways forward, but I find there's a big delta between listening and hearing. People will listen, but not hear you, and that's a problem. We need to internalize it, we need to understand, as Ken said, what brought that person to that opinion that's so different than mine, and maybe somewhere in between is the right answer. But if you don't hear and you just listen, you'll never get there. And the third one is how to handle conflict is respect. I don't agree with some stuff, but I can walk away and still respect that person, and not. That doesn't translate from day to day. I come from a very New York point of view, where you can have a heated argument with your boss, walk back, get your jacket, come back and say, let's go to lunch. And that's happened on more than one occasion. I think we need to be in a place where you're at right now is where you're at, not where you were 10 minutes ago, because bringing that forward doesn't help anybody.
Okay, did you say you wanted us to not say if like other things were said, right?
Either's fine. You don't have to repeat, but if you choose to repeat, that's fine.
Okay, I mean, my ideas for 1 and 2 were really, well said around the table. And for 3, just as a little bit of a different, catchphrase, I said the golden rule, like handling conflict, to treat others as you wanna be treated.
For the first, I put, we need to feel heard, helpful, valued, and focused on the job. For 2, I said we need to speak, listen, question, disagree, and hold each other to task. And for number 3, it's kind of all of number 2, and then handle it calmly, vote, and move on.
Theoretically, I'm passing, but I would echo much of what everyone else said, and I think the most important category, number 1, would just be able to take risks and not feel criticized over that.
I had a lot of the similar ones. I guess the ones that were not similar or maybe slightly different, we want to feel inspired. So it's coming with a clear head and allowing all ideas and listening to those. I too feel that conflict doesn't have to be bad, and it can actually lead to better results as long as it's done respectfully. The other one I would put out there that I didn't hear is vulnerable. We have to come to the table vulnerably, and we have to put it out there, right? Take those risks is a similar, and take our defenses off so that we can take in what is being said around us and hear that. I guess those would be the only things that weren't already said.
Any reflections? having gone through this little exercise? Anything that,
I heard the word calmly and respect a lot.
yes?
I heard transparency a few times too,
Feeling
which I
heard.
think is especially important.
What else did you notice?
I think we heard the feeling heard, but then on the, what can we do, listen. I think that's what it is.
I think what was important to all of us was remarkably similar. I mean, I think
And
that,
the conflict can lead to good.
but everything beautiful in nature comes out of conflict, so.
But that's why we're all here, that's why there's 9 of us, right? We bring
Yeah.
each bring different perspectives.
If you listen,
If you listen.
You have to listen.
And here.
and hear.
If
And
we
don't
all,
take it personally.
if we all agreed, it would be a really, really boring place.
Oh my God, it's, but the meetings would be social.
That'd be fine.
Was there anything that was said that you couldn't agree with?
Couldn't?
Could not?
Are we testing out number 3?
Sorry, that's good. No, I appreciate that.
Did a better job than I could have done with that.
Practice, that's all it is, practice. Okay, so, are you ready to move on to slide 22? or-
Yes, I think we're at slide 22, and I hate to say it, but there's a slide 23, but we get to go home.
I'm not sure you're hearing that.
Oh, I
So
have a
we
clicker.
actually, we touched upon this, so, this is
I
filled,
have-
this is filled in your version,
Right,
not this version.
no, but if you refresh it, I can't refresh from here.
You can refresh from there.
No.
She has to touch the computer, it's just a little awkward.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
It's a, yeah, I noticed it before.
Get technology.
There you go, look at that. I know, it's for some reason,
So,
That minute as it.
I am sure that, this could be cleaned up and wordsmithed, but it's certainly a lovely start, right, to a charter and a statement about how you intend to work together. And so if we're working with children, which I know we're not, we would, it becomes a touchstone, right? Something you can always come back to. So we agreed that when we disagreed, we would do this, right? So that's how it is used in classrooms. And so how you choose to use it, I think will probably shift over time, right? But I do think it's always very helpful to hear people talk about what they really value. Because, like you said, you wanna be heard as well as listened to. And so these reminders, I think are just make everything run more smoothly. So thank you for this.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And then, yeah, these are your next steps. It's an enormous task, so good luck.
And there's, if you don't mind, Isabelle, yep, one more.
Do you wanna?
Yeah, so we spoke to some of these points, and I think the next steps for Margaret and I is to spend an hour or so together to look at that master agenda and to memorialize some of what we've said tonight, and perhaps think about what's actually reasonable to get done in a year, right? You heard me talk about the buckets of learning and prioritizing that, whether it's as goals or as the work that's done throughout the committee. I think that that's an important piece to come back to, and I had to get my head around what that actually might look like. And I think there perhaps needs to be a broader conversation as to, and I think when we start to process the list, is whether or not we need to come back to that master agenda and think about some long-term strategic planning and or thinking, and whether or not these are just drops or something that needs to be bigger and broader. And the last piece is for all of you to do, and I think that the charter actually will frame that conversation well, and Isabelle and cabinet members that are left, anyone that I still have standing, will leave, and you'll have the opportunity to look at the board goals once again and assess yourself and how you performed against them, and we'll move from there. So I'd like to thank you, because this was really important for me, certainly, and I know, hopefully it was just as important for all of you, but it does frame the conversation in our work ahead and give us some structure to it, albeit the circumstances this year are far different than I think circumstances and hopefully years to come will be. So, thank you. And that's it, Margaret, I'm gonna leave this with you. I did share the PowerPoint, a copy of the PowerPoint with all of you.
Thank you.
You can leave the room messy and we'll clean that up in the morning.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, great, thank you.
There's a folder if you wanna grab your documents before you leave, in there.
I take a-
I'd like to thank Isabelle. Can we get a move facilitating? I almost forgot
Oh,
about
Kathleen,
that.
you don't get to go.
You don't get to go, Kathleen.
Kathleen, you stay.
Yeah.